Hello, folks. We are up to fold number 5 in the Noble Eightfold Path, and the ratings aren't so good on this series. I don't know, maybe you guys don't dig the Noble Eightfold Path, but maybe this episode will jack up my ratings because this is the sexiest fold of the Noble Eightfold Path, not because it has anything to do with sex, but it's because it's the one people obsess about the most, and it is right livelihood. So just to prove to you how popular this whole right livelihood thing is, I found an article from March 16th, 2011 in the Huffington Post, of all places, on right livelihood, and it is by a guy named Lewis Richmond, who apparently teaches Zen up in the Marin County area. So, this might explain some of what's going on in this article. And the teaser at the top of the article says, "Right livelihood is now a societal, even planetary responsibility." And in the article, Mr. Richmond quotes Bhikkhu Bhasnagoda Rahula, who wrote a book called Buddha's Teaching on Prosperity. And this guy in turn quotes the Buddha, who says, "The layperson's objective is to live a long and dignified life with the wealth obtained through rightful means." And Mr. Richmond, interprets this to mean, clearly the Buddha saw prosperity and financial security as a good and appropriate activity for lay people. Well, I'm not so sure about the Buddha's concern for our financial prosperity and security, but we'll leave that aside. Here's some more of what Mr. Richmond says in his article. "Regardless of our job or lack of job, we should be aware of the implications and consequences of what we do. Though work is a spiritual practice," that's Richmond's book, "by intention emphasized the choices and changes an individual could make in his or her workplace, I also feel that conscious livelihood should not be limited to individual awareness and action. Society at large also has a responsibility to be conscious of the consequences of its economic and employment policies. It's not clear whether the Buddha thought of right livelihood in this way, but it behooves us to do so now." And here's an article from 2017 Tricycle Magazine called "Right Livelihood Isn't Just About Your Day Job," and it's by Kirsten Vankatesh. I think I'm pronouncing that close to right. She says, "In our messy and entangled world, it is impossible to separate what we do for a living from the larger system that makes living possible. Even professions that seem admirable and praiseworthy can get tangled up in negative consequences. A physician today is implicated in a dubious industry that often benefits corporations and shareholders more than patients. My own career as a professor at a private college is modeled with questions about the consequences of the debt these young people take on in order to study." And that's pretty typical of the consternation that the concept of right livelihood causes to Buddhists in the West. And I know it caused me a lot of worry and difficulty because I was first introduced to the concept of right livelihood and Buddhism in general when I was either my first or second year of university at Kent State University in Ohio. And I must have changed my major, I don't know, half a dozen times at least during the times I was in university, and a lot of the reason that I did that was because I was so concerned that whatever livelihood I was sort of preparing myself to go out in the world and do had to be right in the Buddhist sense. Now, how did the Buddha define right livelihood? Well, here we get from one of the early sutras. "And what is right livelihood? There is a case where a disciple of the noble ones, having abandoned dishonest livelihood, keeps his life going with right livelihood. This is called right livelihood." Okay, that's kind of vague. And he says, "What is wrong livelihood? Scheming, persuading, hinting, belittling, and pursuing gain with gain. This is wrong livelihood." And in another sutra, he gets a little bit more specific. He says, "A lay follower should not engage in 5 types of businesses." Which 5? Businesses in weapons, businesses in trafficking human beings, businesses in meat, businesses in intoxicants, and businesses in poison. So, getting back to like my own story with this, one of the first jobs I got after graduating from university was at a place that was then called the Summit County Board of Mental Retardation and Developmental Disabilities. That's a mouthful right there. They've probably changed the name since then. I don't know. This was in Akron, Ohio. I know the institution still exists. But my job was helping mentally handicapped adults. Ostensibly, what we were doing was training them to get jobs in the outside world, and we were doing that in what they called a sheltered workplace. So they would do these jobs for some kind of a fraction of minimum wage that was calculated according to the pace that they did jobs, compared to people on the outside who were doing the same jobs. It was very complicated. So they would actually get paid, and I was sort of a supervisor there, but we were trying to train them. The fact is that hardly anybody in that group ever got out of the sheltered workshops. A few of them. I did see one or two people get out in the 2 years that I worked there, but basically, they just stayed there for life. But the thing is, this was livelihood that I don't think anybody could argue was not right livelihood. This was totally right livelihood. I was working with these unfortunate people who had tremendous difficulties. There were all levels in this place. So some of them were, you could barely. They just seem like ordinary people you might see on the street, but slightly odd, to people who were just severely mentally handicapped and could hardly do anything for themselves. And I worked with all levels because I was kind of a substitute floating person in this organization. So I had to do all kinds of things, including, taking him to the toilet and like a 6 foot tall, 200-pound man and wiping his butt for him, that kind of stuff. That's what I was doing for a living. There could be no doubt that this was right livelihood, But the thing is, I hated it. And I was terrible at it. Fast forward a few years later, and I was working for Tsuburaya Productions in Japan, who are the people who make Ultraman, and was founded by the guy who invented Godzilla, basically, the special effects person behind the Godzilla series in the early days, Eiji Tsuburaya. We made rubber-suited monster movies, with these giant monsters fighting giant superheroes, and I loved that job. And I was still pursuing my Zen practice, but I felt terribly, terribly guilty. Just like, oh my God, how can I do this thing when before I was doing this wonderful thing, and now I'm doing this crappy thing, and loving it so much. At one point, I screwed up my courage and went to Nishijima Roshi and just spilled my guts about how I was gonna, hey Ziggy, how you doing? How I was gonna quit my job and go to a Heiji monastery. I was asking for Nishijima Roshi's blessing and help to get there and train as a monk and then go out in the world and be a good Buddhist monk as my, living. And I expected Nishijima Roshi to be delighted to hear this because, he was my Zen teacher. Of course he's going to be delighted that I decided to pursue Zen, wholeheartedly and do it as my whole, vocation and everything. He was not. I was just, he just said, don't do that. In no uncertain terms, he said, you should stay working with Tsuburaya Productions and you should make that job a little better. And I was just floored by this. This was amazing to me that he would say this, and I didn't really know what to make of it. But as I kind of let it sink in, went back to my job and tried to put his advice into place, into work, I realized he was right. It was a better thing for me to do to try to make the things that Tsuburaya Productions did a little better in whatever way I could, than to, follow this bizarre dream of being a full-time Buddhist monk, which eventually sort of became my life. I don't know what you call what I do now, but something like that. But let's see what Dogen has to say about right livelihood. In 108 Gates of Dharma Illumination, Dogen says, right livelihood is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it we get rid of all evil ways. So that sounds nice. That's pretty straightforward. I don't think I even need to explain that one. And in the 37 Elements of Bodhi, he goes on for a long time about right livelihood, but I'll just summarize it for you. Basically, he says right livelihood is being a monk. It says, right livelihood as a branch of the path is early morning gruel and noon rice. It is to stay in the temple grounds and let the soul play. Let the soul play is a euphemism for zazen. And to demonstrate it directly upon the round wooden chair. And the round wooden chair is what a Zen teacher sat on in those days to give a lecture. So, being a monk and being eventually a teacher. There is not only right livelihood, but also pure livelihood. In conclusion, just to learn in practice from a Buddhist ancestor may be right livelihood. So that, that pretty much narrows it down to monk. And as you heard if you were listening to the last few episodes of this series, this comes on the heels of him talking about how it's better to be a monk of any kind than a lay person. So, he's going to talk about livelihood in the terms of being a monk. However, pretty obviously, Dogen did not think that for everybody in the world they should be monks, because he was depending on lay people and their contributions, just like I do, for his support and his livelihood. That's how he earned his living with people who were donors. And one of his biggest donors, his main supporter, was a samurai warlord. Talk about being entangled in larger systems. That is definitely being entangled in larger systems. So I'm not going to try to tell you what you should do for a living, but I do want to kind of draw your attention to another piece of advice or a saying or whatever, a line from Dogen. This is from 4 Elements of a Bodhisattva's Social Relations, and he says, earning a living and doing productive work are originally nothing other than free giving. Free giving is dana, and you might have heard the word dana if you've ever gone to a yoga class or something. They talk about dana for a teacher, and it's often used as a euphemism for donation in these days, but it means generosity. So he's saying that even working for a living, even working for a paycheck, is originally an example of generosity. That is a concept that's, I've written about it in a few places, but it's a concept that was hard for me to initially get my head around, but when I got my head around it, I thought, oh, that's right. Because, we really, as human beings, I know this is sort of a controversial position to take sometimes these days, but we like to work. We like to work and we like to contribute to society, and most of us will do it even if we don't have to. Like I say, this is a controversial position. Some people will try to get away from it, and they'll think, oh, I'll be happier just sitting at home playing video games all day. But after a little while of that, they'll find out that they're not happier that way. That the happiest thing you can do as a human being is to contribute to the betterment of all human beings. That is what makes us happy as people. You can probably hear people contributing to the betterment of human beings by digging in the street all during this video. Sorry about that. Hope it's not too loud. But even those people are doing it, they're probably thinking that they're doing it for a paycheck and that it's hot outside and they don't want to be here, and etc., etc. I know, because I haven't worked on streets, but I've done that kind of labor-intensive work before. But in reality, the feeling of contributing to society it makes us all feel better. Here's some more of what Dogen says in that essay. We give ourselves to ourselves and give the external world to the external world. And he talks about leaving flowers to the wind and leaving birds to time, which basically means letting things be as they are. He talks about giving to parents, wives, and children as an example of generosity, and he talks about the merit of giving up even a single speck of dust, which I think is interesting. And he talks about doing a job as a method of free giving. And he says, both receiving the body and giving up the body are free giving. So even living and dying are free giving, because we receive a body and then we do the things that this body needs to do in the world as gifts to the world, and then we die and our body itself becomes a gift to the worms and whatever else eats it when we're dead. So even that is an example of free giving. And for all the consternation of the Huffington Post writer's article and the Tricycle Magazine article, there's no job you're going to be able to find that doesn't have some kind of a dark side attached to it, especially these days. And those articles kind of make the case that, try to make the case that, oh yeah, in the past it wasn't like this. I think that's bull. It was just like this in the past, and it's just like this today. Everything is very, very tangled up in stuff. So whatever you do is going to have some kind of dark side, as I said. I think the best thing to do is just focus on the job you're doing and do it right. And if it's really, really, really dark, you might want to go and do something else if you're a mafia hit person or whatever, thing like that that's really, really dark. But for the most part, the jobs are kind of even in terms of that, and trying to find this wonderful job that's never going to cause any harm to the planet or anything like that, you're probably not going to succeed. So just do your work the best you can and relate to the people who you're working with the best you can. To me, that's right livelihood. And for me, learning to work with the rubber-suited monster brigade and do all that kind of stuff as a means of free giving, changed my whole outlook. Changed my outlook in terms of self and others. It was really a deep teaching that Nishijima Roshi gave me on that day. And, I'm offering it to you for whatever it's worth. Some of you might accept it, and some of you might want to battle with me in the comments section. That's fine. Anyway, that's my talk about Right Livelihood. If you want to contribute to my Right Livelihood, the way you can do it is by donating to me via the link that you're seeing on the screen below, or if you're on YouTube, you'll see direct links to my Patreon and PayPal pages. That is where most of my living comes from. That's how this all comes together. And if you are having financial trouble, please do not contribute to me. That I don't want to have contributions from people who are really struggling. But those of you who aren't struggling and who are still contributing to me really make everything great for me. And I thank you very much. Have a good time all the time. See you later. Bye.